Welcome to this episode of the Sneaker Principle Podcast. Um, Today I'd like to talk to you about current events. As we all know, or at least we should all know and be aware of what's taking place in Venezuela. I believe now, former President Maduro was removed by U.S. military. This was about 2 days ago. And social media has been flooded with a lot of course, news coverings. It's also the internet, so we also have a lot of memes, a lot of jokes about the Nike Tech suits that he was wearing. A lot of comedy, that's being extracted from this situation. Maduro, based on what I understand and what's been out there, I've never lived in Venezuela. I've never visited Venezuela. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I know anyone personally who's from Venezuela. But what I know is that he didn't make for an easy life in that country. There were a lot of things that were wrong, and a lot of things that needs to be addressed, and hopefully will be fixed. However, my concern here is, just historically speaking, especially as an educator who really believes that current events is something that should be taught to our students. That was something that was a mainstay in my education growing up, whether I was in Nigeria or even here in America in my early years in elementary and then middle school. There was always time for current events, what's happening in the world. I still remember putting on newspapers and reading about what's happening locally, what's happening, nationally, and also what's happening internationally. Something that we've moved away from. In our schools these days, we spend most of our time, when it comes to social studies, focusing on historical events. Things that are not happening today. We have very little conversations about what's happening in the world, and even in our own communities today. Things have been so politicized that you have to be careful about what you talk about, because everything in the news has a political bend to it. And depending on that political bend and what stance you take, you can easily be canceled, and people don't want to be canceled, especially educators. But in this case here, I have to speak as an educator, as a school leader, and also as a son of Africa. Again, for those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Uche Chukwu Lawrence Njoku, and that name is not a name that is, given as a homage to the continent. This is a name that is given to me tribally, Uche Chukwu Njoku, which is an Igbo name from the southwestern part of Nigeria, where my parents are from. And I was born in Nigeria. I was actually born in Nigeria. I was born in northern Nigeria. So I have invested interest in what happens in that country as a father, as an educator, as a citizen of Africa, and a citizen of the world. So in this episode, I want to start off by saying that they say oil is black gold. I'm sure you've heard that, right? Oil is black gold. But for many nations, it becomes a curse, a black curse. In this instance, I can say, fueling greed, destabilization, and making the sovereignty of nations negotiable. And this is something that's been seen over and over again. If you look at countries like in the Middle East, Iraq, Libya, which is in Africa, that other nations they're not just poor countries or third world countries. These nations have tremendous resources. Venezuela, which is an OPEC nation, I believe. Yeah, it was OPEC nation. And then Nigeria. Let's not forget, around the holiday season, around Christmas, Like there are airstrikes in Nigeria, which I made an episode about, which I was questioning, like, with the issues happening in Nigeria, which has been happening for decades, going back to when my parents were children. Why now? You know, there's the talk of Christians being killed in Nigeria, but that was happening in the '60s. Why now? And the only thing that I can personally connect to is natural resources. When you wait for things to be unstable enough to now demand intervention, whether it's real or manufactured demands for intervention, then guess what happens now? A country like Nigeria is no longer immune, or maybe was never immune, to the same level of intervention that we've seen in Venezuela. And I have to say this, one of the things I thought was very interesting in the news reports about beyond just, the airstrikes, the deployment of special forces into Venezuela, the capture of former President Maduro, and then the flooding of memes that came up after the news was reported that America had seized or were in control of millions of gallons of barrels of oil, these oil tankers. And my question is, why? If anything, why are they being seized and not being secured for the people of Venezuela? Why not say, hey, here's your oil. Oh, or we found your wallet. So here, we're holding it for you until you showed up. So here's your wallet, because it belongs to you. So you get to determine what happens to the wallet, the contents of that wallet. But that's not how the news reports are reading. It's reading as, oh, finders keepers, losers weepers type of scenario. And so again, I'm saying, if this has happened in Venezuela, what makes Nigeria immune as an OPEC nation, and as, to my understanding, the 5th largest producer of oil in the world, and not only that, also a hub for resources that includes, I have a list here of let me see here. Nothing extensive, but I mean, we're talking about lithium and gas and other rare earth minerals that are critical for global technology and the electric vehicle boom. When we're talking about being able to build these microchips and all these other technologies and AI is not just a software code. It requires powerful machines that need certain conductors in their circuit boards and chips to make all this happen. And again, these resources are not in America. They're not in Europe. They're in that belt of the world around the equator where you find these things. So we're talking about places like in the Caribbean, and places and especially in Africa that has these resources. But if these countries are aware of their power and aware that they can negotiate prices of these resources for the betterment of their nations, guess what? Things become very expensive for these billionaires who are seeking, to maximize profits. So again, what makes Nigeria immune to what has happened in Venezuela? So as educators, There are patterns that we need to make sure which is being taught in our schools, historical context-wise, making sure that our kids understand the world that they're about to inherit. It can not just be, let's talk about like, the civil wars and the revolutionary wars and World War I, World War II, the allies and axis of evil and all these different things. We need to talk about what's happening right now. We need to put context on what's going on right now. Because if we're not doing that, we're creating a very weak starting point for our children as they move into the world. Okay, let's get back to the point here. Because I feel like I'm getting a little emotional with this in this topic here. But so the lessons of Venezuela. Number one, educators, we have to teach the patterns. Okay, Venezuela is oil rich, politically fragile, and internationally isolated. Now, patterns. Nigeria is oil rich, politically fragile. I mean, look at the past political elections. There's always some kind of level of disruption, and then internationally isolated. Nigeria is not a power player on the international stage. It's a, secondary player, in some cases, tertiary player in the sense that it's constantly asking for support. It's not the one that's providing support. And we've been made vulnerable by debt. We owe a lot of money internationally, and usually that debt is covered in, pro quo. We'll pay to play, siphoning of resources to other international players and to cover our debts, which means that those resources that can be building the infrastructure of the most populous nation, most powerful nation, which it should be on the continent, doesn't happen. We live in a space in Nigeria of division, tribalistically, regional, and of course desperation. When you can't feed your people, protect your own economy, or control the narrative, someone else will. Again, look at Venezuela. There are parallels that Nigeria must be aware of. At least those of us Nigerians, whether you're in Nigeria or you're international, wherever you are in this world, there are parallels that we must recognize and precautions that we must be willing to see and also to be aware of. Nigeria's oil wealth and political complexity is at the core of what might happen next. It's not about what's going on in northern Nigeria. It's not about the killing of Christians. Because if it was about that could have been resolved a long time ago. There could have been an international coalition of nations who said, listen, we're not going to allow that to happen. Whether you're killing Christians or killing Muslims, we're not going to allow that to happen. But it's been allowed to happen. The question is why? Nigeria's fragile institutions and rising insecurity and youth unrest. Again, these are things that happen in Venezuela as well. But again, for us, it's become so common and so just expected that we're not seeing how these parallels kind of scripts out a next step, potentially, to see the same thing happen. Our external debts, our foreign contracts that are ridiculous, the fact that we have so many international agencies and organizations come into Nigeria to build and to work on projects, and we're paying out of the nose, and in some cases incurring so much debt that we might not be able to, that honestly not even might not be able to. The intention is for us to not be able to get out of that debt, so that these foreign actors will have, you know, extensive access and to resources because we can't cover it in currency. So we have to barter for those services, for what we're getting. And let's be honest here, it's not a lot. The hard truth is this: if Nigeria doesn't take care of Nigeria, if we don't take care of Nigeria, someone else will. And it's not going to be it's not going to be with love. It's going to be with, we did this for you, so now you have to give us this. We did this for you, so now you have to give us this. What educators, leaders, and people must see: you don't have to be a politician to pay attention to geopolitics. Just as a normal citizen, you don't have to. Educators, we can't say we're educating our children for the future if we're not aligning instruction with geopolitics. We can't just teach lifestyle in schools. We have to teach political awareness, not just what's happening locally, what's happening statewide, or what's happening nationally, which we don't even do, period. Let's be honest, we don't. The most we might say to kids is like, hey, civic learning. Remember when you turn 18 to go out and vote. That's not education. We have to make sure that our children, our students, regardless of what age, are being prepared for a world that is not quickly, but is international. And if you don't have understanding what's happening internationally, you are completely locked out from wealth, from access, from being seen. Our students are going to inherit this world. Are we preparing them to understand it? That's what I'm asking. Are we preparing them to understand it? It's our jobs as educators to help our students see, help our young people see the price of resource dependency. And that could be parallel. Listen, I'll tell you this, that could be paralleled right now in the hood, in the proverbial hood. You know, coming to America, I lived, we settled in South Central LA. Spent many years in Inglewood, California. I got to see, poverty from a different lens in the hood. And the fact that there's a price of resource dependency when there are no jobs, so you have to rely on social welfare programs, social welfare housing programs that herds everyone into the hood, the ghetto, right? There is a price to pay for that. And you see generations of poverty. And we then say, hey, education is access out. But if it's education access out, how come it still happening? How come those same children that were educated, with the hope of moving them into a different world are still in the hood? And now their children are being promised the same. It's a revolving door, right? Yes, a few make it out, a very few, but that's by design. We also have to make sure our students understand the legacy of colonial extraction. Not just slavery, not just, how the world was divvied up, but the legacy, meaning how it's still happening to this day, how colonialism is still, the script by which the world is operated. Venezuela hasn't been Venezuela for the past 1,000 years. Venezuela is the result of colonialism. So is Nigeria. So is the vast majority of the world. Certain nations, quote unquote, discovered, quote unquote, civilized, and then at some point in time returned independence to. But how are these former quote unquote colonial nations independent nations when they're still depending on, the aid of their colonial masters? This has to be taught and understood, and what the implications are for our students, our young people, as they move into being citizens of the greater planet. And of course, this is often not discussed. Actually, it's not discussed at all, unless you're just you're a school, you're an educator that's just brave enough to really speak the truth. The role of global greed and local corruption. Venezuela probably wouldn't have been in the state it was in if it wasn't for global greed balanced with local corruption, because global greed will identify the locally corrupt and say, hey, this is what we need you to do. And in return, we're going to make sure we fatten your pockets. We'll throw some coins in there. I can tell you this right now, in Nigeria, that has been the mainstay for a very, 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 very long time. The global greed of the former colonial masters and the corrupt local leaders who see themselves first above their people. Real power is knowing the game before you're played. As a matter of fact, I think I'm going to turn that into a banner and put it in my hallways of my school. Real power is knowing the game before you're played. Not before you play the game, but before the game plays you. That should be the vision of education. Making sure that our students, our young people, understand that real power is knowing the game before they get played. In closing, I wanted to say this. Africa must not be next. Nigeria must not be next. And I'm hoping that this whole entire podcast episode was a complete waste of time. And people, flood my inbox with, see, you're tripping, you're overthinking, you're saying that you're doing the most, you're saying way too much, and none of that happened. That's my prayer. But I don't feel very confident. I call to educators, leaders, and the diaspora. Let's teach history with urgency. Let's raise youth with sovereignty in mind. And demand local accountability before foreign intervention becomes inevitable. And this is not just for those who are in the nations that are at risk, but for those of us who are even here in America. What questions are we asking of our local politicians, our statewide representatives, our nationwide representatives, and being part of the conversation of holding them accountable before the foreign interventions that they are proposing becomes inevitable in further wreaking havoc on our nations of birth, our nations of racial identity. I am American. I've served this nation in multiple ways, militarily, as an educator, but I cannot deny the fact that I am, by birth and by full belief and just honor of identity, Igbo by tribe. And the Igbo people, even though we're spread around the world, my Igbo roots are planted deeply in Nigeria. So as a father of two, I teach my kids that they're Nigerians. Yes, they're Americans by citizens by birth, but the blood that flows through their veins is Nigerian, and that means something. And we have to make sure that that's protected by ensuring that our kids that we're educating understand not just Nigeria, not just Venezuela, but their own histories as well. Where did it come from? What is what are the geopolitical happenings of where they come from, and what does that mean for their futures? For my fellow Nigerians who might come across this podcast, and for those who are in support of Nigeria, we must protect Nigeria not just with weapons, but with wisdom. Not just with pride, but with preparation. The world sees our oil, but we must first see our worth. Please share your thoughts. Ask questions. If not to me, if not on this platform, have these conversations with each other. Because we can't just bury our heads in the ground and just say, hey, that's just what's happening somewhere else. But what's happening somewhere else will eventually happen to us. Y'all. It's Uche and Joku, Sneaker Principal. Till next time.